Welcome to the meeting room at Global TV Talk Show, a broadcast service of globalbusinessnews.net.
Now, here's your host, Ed Cohen.
This is Ed Cohen, and you're on Global Business News TV. We've been broadcasting since spring of 2020. Oh. Stand by. Somebody's coming in. I don't know who it is. Alessia.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
Oh, do you know Alessia? Hello.
Yeah.
Hello, Alessia. Yeah, welcome. Okay, we're just going live in 10 seconds. We're going to redo this. Okay. My producer will take care of the edits. So, Alicia, if you want to join us, please come on right now. We're going to go live. Okay. Okay, we're going to start. 3, 2, and 1. This is Ed Cohen in San Diego, California. And today is the first day of winter, December. What is today? 21?
21st.
Yeah, 21. Wow. Okay, the year is almost over. We're looking forward to a safe and healthy and very productive 22. Part of the thinking of leadership development is certainly what's needed, not only in government, but in businesses big and small. And our special guest today, first of all, Michael Gates, is live with us in Helsinki, Finland. And it's 7 a.m. or so here in California and about 5 p.m. over there. And of course, there's a difference in temperature, but we're both inside and cuddling. And also joining us from Mexico City is Stephen Howard, who's author of 21 books on business and Caliente leadership. And if any of you out there want to write a book someday, contact Stephen later. And he's the guy, because he'll help you engineer it. Really. So this is a really interesting show for me, because Michael Gates is a recognized expert in cross-cultural business affairs, cross-cultural training, and the application of that education towards understanding, having empathy. And his, this is really good. One of his pet things is how Shakespeare, I'm going to read this, how Shakespeare can be a useful guide for leaders. He says, I'm only an amateur at this, and not the first in the field by any means, because others, Richard Olivier and Olivier and Mythodrama, are the real experts, Michael Gates says. But he says, thinking about his tragic heroes and those of Greek drama and poetry, he says, if I could extract just one lesson, it would be the dangers of pride and ego. And following that, the importance of humbleness and of acknowledging and empathizing with others. Boy, that sounds familiar, doesn't it, Stephen?
Absolutely.
And of course, he says, as well as learning from the fatal flaws of Shakespeare's heroes, there is so much to be learned from his rhetorical skills to inspire people and change their minds. So, Michael Gates, welcome, and tell us about your affection for Shakespeare.
Well, although I'm in the cross-cultural field at the University at Oxford, I studied English literature. So I've always had a big interest and affection for Shakespeare. And although I haven't professionally used Shakespeare much yet, though I may start doing it a little bit more, recently my interest in it has grown a lot, particularly because we're in such dark and turbulent times. Leaders are challenged, to be almost superhuman, whether in politics or in business, with all the crises going on. Yet on the other hand, our trust in leaders is going down. So I thought it's quite a good time to turn to the best of Western culture to get some guidance. And I think we all know the quotation, which actually is often misquoted, from Henry IV, Part 2, where Henry IV talks about leadership and he says, uneasy is the head that wears a crown. And I think very uneasy at the moment, particularly.
Yeah, Stephen, leadership, executive. I mean, it's got to be a whole new book, because you have to forget what you learned, right?
Well, that's my favorite philosopher is Yoda, and what he says is, and I think it's very pertinent for today's world, is leaders need to unlearn what they have learned. But yeah, uneasy is the head that wears the crown. Very true. And today, yet so many people want to wear that crown. Why do you think that is, Michael?
Yeah, well, I think one of the reasons is ambition, obviously, and but you know, a big question for leadership, and I think particularly political leadership, is you may have the ambition to get there, but what do you do with power once you get there? And I think very often leaders get to the positions that they reach because they're very good communicators, they're good at stirring people's emotions, they can be good, certainly in politics, at winning elections. But then what happens once they're there? And as I think Enoch Powell, what a British politician from the 50s and 60s, 70s, said, that all political careers end in failure. And what is it that makes people fall? Well, if you go back to the ancient Greeks, a hero is a remarkable person who has a tragic flaw, and eventually that flaw is their undoing, and they fall.
A tragic flaw. So
Tragic flaw.
Yeah, my Boston accent is coming through here, but this is not a political show. It's all about business. But let's talk about President Biden and Senator Manchin, and there's a war of the roses or something. What do you think about all that fatal flaw and ego and stuff like that?
Well, it's funny you should mention about Biden, because when I was thinking of leaders, and I agree, let's try and keep it to business, but politics is still a useful thing if you approach it from a non-political angle, from the purely the perspective of leadership. I think for Biden, I was trying to come up with a hero that you could compare him to, and I found it incredibly difficult. So I started looking around on Google and seeing if other people had said, and a few things came up, but the character that I felt from Shakespeare that fitted him best wasn't actually one of the tragic heroes. It was a knight constable in Much Ado About Nothing called Dogberry, who is a little bit self-satisfied, uses a lot of malapropisms, so says the wrong words quite often, which obviously he does, and has a sort of comic incompetence. I'm not making a political judgment here. I'm just talking about character. So I think it's quite difficult to find one to suit Biden. To suit Trump or Boris Johnson, it's much easier. And I'd like to say a little bit more about that later.
All right, Stephen.
I would suggest to you, Michael, that first Shakespeare quote you gave us about uneasy is the head that wears the crown. I think that might be one of the problems with the way people want to be leaders. They want to have the crown. I would suggest you going forward, coming out of the pandemic, we need leaders who don't wear the crown, who are more the kind of individual who builds that team spirit, builds the empathy, looks after their people. I'm not saying people instead of profits, but maybe people in front of profits. What do you think about that?
Oh, I would agree absolutely. And thinking about this topic over the last few days and revisiting some of the key Shakespearean heroes, the most common failing that they have, where they make the wrong decisions and it's a character flaw, is pride, as I mentioned in my LinkedIn quote. There are others.
How would you describe pride?
Well, it's a belief that you're better than others, that you know best, that you don't really value other people, that you have quite a large ego. I mean, the Greek word hubris is it sort of translates as pride, and basically, if you analyze the etymology of the word, it means thinking that you are superior to the gods, which is very dangerous indeed. And in fact, if you think one of the first Greek heroes from the Iliad, Achilles, he suffers from pride, and his mother actually tried to make him like it. She tried to make him immortal, and she dipped him into the river Styx, which was supposed to give him mortality, but she had to hold him somehow. She held him by his heel, and so that's where the expression Achilles' heel comes from. And many leaders have this Achilles heel, which can ultimately prove to be their downfall. And you can probably recognize it with many people fairly early in their life. I mean, if you look at Boris Johnson, then his former master at Eton, when Johnson was 17, said, "I think he honestly believes that he is an exception, one who should be free of the obligations which bind everyone else." And if you look at the events of the last week or so, holding the party, or party in inverted commas, they deny it was a party, at Downing Street during the lockdown. I think one of the reasons people were so angry about it was that it appeared that he saw himself as beyond the law that he was giving out to other people. So those qualities, can be identified very often early on. And unfortunately, I think wanting the crown can attract people who want to achieve power. Apparently, Johnson, when he was only about 7, he said, "I'm going to be king of the world."
I would highly recommend to you and to our audience a book called The Leadership Killer by Bill Treasurer, and he has a co-author. I can't remember the co-author's name, but it's all about leadership hubris, being the killer of leadership. So I think you're spot on there. Highly recommend that book to people. And in business, it's the same way. I mean, you look at the CEO of a Wall Street bank, who recently, or not recently, back in September, made a comment along the lines of, "If you can dine in New York City, you can come to work in New York City," sort of attitude. And so many corporate leaders have thought they're infallible until because I would say same thing you said earlier about political leadership ends in, would you say, tragedy or something? I think failure. Corporate leadership too often ends in that kind of a failure, or the smart ones get out before the company fails, and somebody else has to pick up the pieces for them.
Yeah, they move on to something else.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you look at the original meaning of the word tragedy, we use it quite loosely these days, like something fell off a building and killed someone and they say it was tragic. Well, it's not. It's very sad, it's unfortunate, but it's not tragic, because tragic is very linked to the idea that you've brought on your own fate by this character flaw. And I mean, if you look at some of these heroes, we just looked at Achilles, but Oedipus, he ends up murdering his father and marrying his mother, and because he'd heard a prophecy and he thought he could escape it. And in Greek tragedy, it's very much, it's sometimes less avoidable because it's the gods and fate, but he was in a sense trying to deceive the gods or make their prophecy not true, but he couldn't escape it. And it was his pride that made him think that he could defeat them. If you move to Shakespeare, then Julius Caesar, it's very much about pride, his ambition to create a dynasty, his vanity. Shakespeare, Richard II, his arrogance, belief in his own divinity. Richard III, sort of limitless self-regard, compulsive desire to dominate, narcissistic feelings that of other people meant nothing. I'm sure we can think of some leaders who fell into that mold. And well, I'll stop there for a moment. There are a few more I'd like to look at, but feel free to ask a question. I don't want to keep going on, but it's fascinating looking at these different leaders and what their faults are.
Okay, Stephen.
You're the first person I ever heard refer to Biden as a hero. But going past,
I mean, I'm using hero in the sense of the person in charge.
Oh, okay.
And in fact, the one that I compared him to, Dogberry, is no hero at all. I couldn't think of a real hero, a remarkable person that I could compare him to. So Dogberry is like this knight constable.
Well, okay, tell us from your perspective or Shakespearean perspective. I've often argued that one of our problems in the world today is we don't have any great leaders. I mean, we don't have the Churchills, the Roosevelts, the Kennedys, the Ronald Reagans of the world. That on the political side, we don't necessarily have some of the corporate leaders that we had, like the Jack Welches, the John Reeds at Citibank over the years. One, would you agree that we lack great leadership, both politically and in the business world? And if so, why? What would be your theory on that?
Well, absolutely. And just before I answer that, Alessia just made a comment. Alessia is Russian, and she said, Russian leaders are a good example of a misuse of authority. It's hard to say, but I think one of the reasons is contextual, and the fact that it's become almost impossible to be a good leader. And in Shakespeare, one thing that you do get, because it's drama, is you get the rich and complex situations, that provide a sort of, in a way, a 3D mirror for ourselves to see our own situations. But the situations have become so complex. I mean, Boris Johnson, I do feel sorry for him in a way, because he entered a situation which was absolutely the worst context for the sort of leader that he is, because he's an enthusiastic person. He was actually writing a book on Shakespeare when he was made prime minister, so he had to abandon it. He studied Greek and Latin at university, so he knows all this stuff extremely well. But he's been put in the worst possible situation because by nature, he's a libertarian. And he's the one who has had to impose all these restrictions. So, absolutely a situation he wouldn't have liked to find himself in at all. But you can't choose it. So I think one of the reasons is that increasing complexity. And whatever he does, and whatever some leaders do, you're not going to please everyone, particularly as we're more polarized. And another of his characteristics is that he wants to be liked. And most people want to be liked, but in a leader, you can't always be liked by everyone. And this has made him indecisive in a way, like Hamlet, who is the most indecisive of heroes, probably in world literature.
So what do you think about Boris's hairdo, and why he clings to that?
Well, I'm not the best person to comment on hair, but well, another aspect of Boris is that he is a little bit like the court jester, and in many of Shakespeare's plays, you have the clown, and he likes to portray himself as disorganized, amateurish, which many Brits like. And don't forget that up till now, he's been one of the most popular politicians we've had ever, because of this character that is, shambolic. And people like that. Certainly Brits like it. Germans don't like it. Probably Americans wouldn't like it. But a lot of Brits like people who are shambolic and disorganized. And the hair is a symbol of this disorganization in a way.
So I thought he was much older, but he and his wife just gave birth to a baby.
People are not sure if it's his 7th or 8th child. And that takes you to another thing which you can compare him to a Shakespearean hero. You can compare him to Mark Antony, because Mark Antony is trying to reconcile two worlds. He wants to keep his power, yet at the same time, he is led by his, I don't know how to put this, but his desires, his carnal desires, and wants this carefree life with Cleopatra. So he's reckless, led by lust, which is very Johnsonian as well. And it's this conflict between duty and desire in him. And in a way, that's his flaw. So he's rather different from some of the others. It's not so much pride as those things. Yeah.
So let's go back to President Biden and the Build Back Better bonanza. I'm trying to put another B in there somewhere, but it's like a glutton for punishment, because he was told, not only by the Republicans, but by others, that why put so much together in one huge thing that a lot of people don't understand, never mind like? And, that is putting himself at total risk. The ego thing, I think, that he was going to push forward and people are going to love him for doing it, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. I mean, I think what it's shown in certain things that have, been well publicized is, to me, and again, I really stress, I'm not making a political point here.
Oh, neither am I.
But,
just like why do that?
And I'm not I'm not an expert on American politics, but as an outsider, he's come across as a little bit petulant and mean-spirited at times. And things like looking at his watch and showing bursts of anger. And it makes me think a little bit of Macbeth, because when Macbeth, through his ambition, achieves power, there's one line, and I can't remember it precisely, but he's saying is that when he puts on the king's robes and gown, they're too big for him, and he's sort of lost in it. And I think I see Biden as sort of having got into something which is too big for him, and I've compared him before to the Knight Constable, a functionary, a leader in one way, in that he's in charge of the police, but suddenly having taken on something which is just too big for him. That's my feeling, anyway.
I think you should do an analysis of the candidates in 2024 and from a Shakespearean, and so that the voters have a better insight into who their votes. So start with when we have our primaries in the United States in like January of 2024. From a leadership standpoint, as Ed said, I've written a couple books on it. I'm working on a book now, and the Shakespearean quote that I often use, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I'm not a scholar like you, but it's about things are neither good nor bad, 'tis the way you look at it, or something, of the way you perceive it, or something like that. I would say that quote today should be at the forefront of leaders, both in business and politics. Is don't say that things are terrible, things are bad. Just look at it and have a mindset of dealing with ambiguity, being agile, being able to be adaptable in today's world. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I would agree. I'm trying to recognize where it's from. I think it might be, it's on the tip of my tongue. I think it's from Hamlet. You're looking it up now.
I'm going to Google it while you're talking.
It could be Hamlet. Hamlet is an exception. And I mean, I mentioned Mark Antony is a bit of an exception in the sense that it's not so much about pride, though you could say that he has intellectual pride and, an obsession with words. But he's an example of someone who overthinks things. And, he can't make a decision. But he's put in an extremely difficult situation because he's got to make a decision without definite evidence. So, the king appears to him as a ghost, rather like, in Lion King, the father appears as a ghost. It's all taken from Hamlet in the same way that House of Cards is taken from Macbeth, and Succession is taken from King Lear. So a lot of modern films and series are based on Shakespeare. I was right. It's Hamlet. Yeah, but he's facing this difficult situation because he hasn't got proof or evidence. He's also a very sensitive person, and to kill someone would be very difficult for him. But this takes you to the situation which I think many leaders have found themselves in, and you can relate this to COVID as well, where they don't have enough proof or evidence, yet they still have to make decisions. And that can be extremely difficult. And Johnson has found it very difficult to make those decisions because the sorts of decisions that he's been prompted to make by experts are against his nature. And, there's the issue of conscience with Hamlet as well. So, and leaders can be deceived. But I would say the best leaders are the ones who can decide without enough evidence, but the important distinction is they get it right. So they've almost got a sixth sense for the right thing to do and making decisions before anyone else makes them without evidence. But you can also get it wrong.
Well, let's talk about Putin and the games that he's playing right now. I mean, you could see it's like a chessboard, and it in plain sight.
Yeah, and I think that is a very good metaphor. You couldn't have chosen a better metaphor for the Russians, like chess, and they are very good at chess, playing a few moves ahead. If you look at Tolstoy's War and Peace, the Napoleon. Napoleon is. You just said now Putin plays chess, Americans play checkers, which lots of and what was I going to say now?
Sorry.
The Putin chess.
Yeah. So chess. Yes, Tolstoy's War and Peace. The general who defeats Napoleon, Kutuzov, he acts like a chess player because Napoleon is going forward, and it's he's following the strategic plan. His big failing is that he doesn't know when to rip it up and stop. So he keeps going, but because we've sacrificed so many generals so far that their lives would have been in vain if we don't carry on. What does Kutuzov do? He destroys Moscow and keeps out of the way and just waits for the winter to come, and the winter does the work for him. So Tolstoy's view of leadership is that leaders can't actually change very much, but what they can do is ride on more powerful things, and this could be riding on a sort of change in the way that the world is going. I'm not describing that very well, but
that pipeline that was started with the German politicians 10, 15 years ago, Gerhard Schroeder, I believe.
Yeah,
he became the president of that venture, which was really smart move. And but now it's come back to haunt, and that's like a devil's choice for the NATO.
And it's interesting you mentioned Schroeder because he and Putin got on very well. And there's one thing that Germans and Russians have in common is that they build these, what I would call soul friendships. In Russian, soul is Dusha. In German, it's Seele. And they connected at a very deep level. I just wanted to say one more thing about Putin, and which is this, is that Russians tend to admire very strong leaders. Very powerful leaders. And if you think about the vastness of Russia in the past, it couldn't be held together without a very strong leader. And there's a wonderful poem by Pushkin, we're getting off from Shakespeare now, called The Bronze Horseman. And in The Bronze Horseman, you have this government functionary, a very lowly guy, and he's looking at the statue of St. Peter the Great in St. Petersburg, which I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's the biggest statue I've ever seen. It's enormous. And as he's looking at it, the statue, which is on it's Peter the Great on a horse, comes down off its plinth and chases him through Moscow. Sorry, through St. Petersburg. Chases him all. And on the one hand, as a reader, you feel a sort of admiration, the magnetism of power. But on the other hand, you feel terror. And, this is... this describes in a way, I think, very well, this Russian attraction to power while at the same time fearing it. And Putin is very good at exploiting that.
So, Stephen, is this a book or what?
Well, I think there's several books in here without a doubt. But when you talk about the one person who talked about, well, I have to keep pushing on because I've lost so many generals. In business decisions, we call that sunk cost theory.
It's the sunk cost theory.
It's the sunk cost theory, yeah. And sadly, so many organizations are still doing that today. It's kind of like, well, we have these offices. That's our cost, so we have to bring people back into them because otherwise, we have an expense that we can't justify. Well, that's bad thinking at the moment.
Well, my daughter's company, my daughter works for in the UK, they were very sensible. Within about 2 or 3 weeks after lockdown, they said, we're getting rid of the office, just leaving 1 or 2 rooms. And from now, we're a virtual company, which I think was quite good because that sort of work that she does can be done virtually.
So, where does Shakespeare land in terms of one of the things I'm working on right now is what I might call human leadership or kind of humane leadership. Does Shakespeare have anything along those lines about, again, leading with your concern for your people first and your results second?
Well, he mainly looks at heroes who fail.
You're right.
Because, and again, I'm using the word hero, not necessarily in a positive way, simply as the main character who is in some way a remarkable person. But the one leader that I can think of in Shakespeare who is really portrayed as a great leader is Henry V. And he certainly has a sort of, he puts himself at the same level as the troops. And he's very clever. I mean, one of the most famous speeches is on the morning of the Battle of Agincourt. And you imagine you've got the English army pitted against the French, who are well rested. They have a hugely larger force of soldiers and army. The English army is tired and depleted, and they've got to win. So what he does is the night before the battle, he disguises himself as a common soldier and walks around the tents and speaks to the soldiers. Why does he disguise himself? Because he became as the king. Of course, they're not going to tell him the truth because they're afraid of not him as a person, but of the whole concept of kingship. And one of the things that I think can tell a leader that the people who are working for her or him trust them is that they're willing to challenge them and that they are willing to talk about mistakes. But anyway, it's the king, but he's disguised. Why does he do that? Because he finds out what their concerns are. He listens. And that's really important, obviously, for a leader to listen. He listens to them. He researches the audience in advance. And then when he makes his speech, he uses things which will really inspire them. So he talks a lot about the fact that they're weak and the enemy is strong. And if you inspire people to say, well, although we're weak, we're going to win. That's very inspiring. I mean, Churchill used it in retrospect. One of his most famous sayings after the Battle of Britain was, never was so much owed by so many to so few. And it's, again, this idea of the weak against the stronger. It's inspiring. And he uses humility. So he puts himself at the same level as them. He gives them a noble purpose, which is honor. And he says, we're in it together. This challenge is one that we all share. We're a band of brothers, which again is very powerful. You know, the leader saying, look, we're all in this together. We're brothers. And then he talks about what life will be like after they've won and how in their old age they will be able to relate with great pride that they were there when these wonderful things were done. They haven't happened yet. So, you know, paint a vision of what life will be like when we've succeeded. So I think that's Shakespeare's probably best example of a humane leader. I mean, he's not always humane. You know, he has people murdered, executed. But in the main, he is a humane leader, and he's one who listens and who gives a good vision of the future.
Hi, this is Ed, and I thank you for tuning in to Global TV Talk Show, a unit on globalbusinessnews.net. We broadcast to the world, as you know by now. So I wanted to make sure that you understand that our programs are advertising supported. We're grateful for co-sponsors, advertisers. They have a marketing budget coupled with a strong desire to be associated with our top quality program. And of course, I'm grateful. Thank you. So for the next few minutes, you're going to see some commercials. It's mostly very low key, and our prices are very, very reasonable. Our exposure for the advertisers go 12 months and beyond. Some of our advertisers have been with us since March, April of 2020. And Google Analytics has tracked over 125,000 what they call audience page views, which means you looking at this page, that's a page view. Now, if you happen to go to one of our other shows, or to our radio broadcasts, or to our newspaper or magazine, those become additional page views as measured by Google Analytics. And so when they say 125,000 since spring of 2020 up through Labor Day, a month ago, that's pretty good numbers. And the past 30 days, Google Analytics has measured just under 6,000 audience page views. And that, according to them, is a 42% increase in audience participation over the month of August. So thank you very much. Well, here's our advertisers, and we'll be back in just a couple of minutes or so, and we'll proceed with this interesting conversation. Thank you.
This episode from the meeting room of Global TV Talk Show is brought to you by
The Bridge School, the accredited international online private school of choice, at bridgek12.org.
Porch Light Rental and Destination Services. Reduce your renter lump sum or managed relocation costs. Visit them at porchlightrental.com.
And by airs.com. With our full range of services, we can help design and manage your international relocation. Find us at airs.com.
Primestone Partners, featuring corporate, government, and developer housing solutions, as well as senior-level advisory services. Find them at primestonepartners.com.
And by International Auto Source. We are the vehicle experts for expats, featuring all major brands of automobiles with flexible solutions and financing. On the web at intlauto.com.
Become a global player in your field.
Cross Culture to Go provides virtual support for your global business and career success.
We can help you thrive in 140 plus countries and markets.
On the web at crossculturetogo.com.
Something that's really neat is that the Bridge School partners with various organizations to provide learning for their students. For example, we partner with a major ballet company, and we are able to enroll several of their students into our school. So now not only is the student able to participate in a school and have a seamless transition while they're very active in their ballet career, but now they have other dancers that are with them that are doing some of the same courses. So it's almost becoming a camaraderie where they're taking similar courses, they're working together on their ballet, and really being able to form this great partnership with these organizations to provide a needed service. A lot of times there are student athletes who will spend hours and hours at the gym or at the basketball courts, wherever it is. And if they're attending a traditional school, they're in school from 8 to 3. They get a quick snack, and then they're at the gym for 3 to 4 hours in the evening. Coming to us and having that partnership, they're able to break that up throughout the day. They can have a morning practice, get some schooling in, have an afternoon practice, finish their schooling in the evening. So there's that flexibility. And additionally, if there are tournaments or performances, it's fantastic because if there's a week where they have shows straight through, they can take that week off of learning and then pick back up when they're done. So it offers this great flexibility. And for the program owners of these sports leagues, it is a win-win situation for them because they see this need. They see this need that their students need to make sure that they are obtaining the grades necessary to be successful adults in our country and in other countries. But it provides them an environment where they can be successful at both.
Hi, I'm Sergei Gorbatov.
I'm Angela Lane.
Together we are researchers, writers and practitioners in the field of human resources.
And we've also been multi-country, multi-assignment career expats.
We owe our professional development and growth to a very large extent to the international assignment opportunities that we have had.
But in a world where distributed work may become the norm, we also want to understand what will happen to the nature, duration, and purpose of international assignments.
Together with our colleague, Julian Dalzell from the University of South Carolina, we're undertaking a study on the future of expatriation.
And we'd value your contribution. You can participate in this important study by completing a simple 10-minute questionnaire.
Access the questionnaire by typing in your browser tinyurl.com/expert study. That's tinyurl.com/expert study. You can also find the link here on Ed's website next to this video.
Thank you for joining us in this study. In return for your contribution, we'll provide you with a copy of our research.
And of course, you'll be invited to an exclusive webinar hosted by Ed, where we will share our findings right here on Global Business News.
And so please go to tinyurl.com/expat study. Take the survey so that we can better understand the future of expatriation.
I was wondering about Romeo and Juliet, and I just saw that comment by Alessia. What do you say, Michael?
Well, I wouldn't see it so much as about leadership as about families. And, one of the main things, I suppose, is that we want what we can't get. These two families are pitted against each other, and they want each other more, Romeo and Juliet, because it's forbidden. So I think that's one of the aspects of it, but not so much on leadership, I would say, in Romeo and Juliet. I mean, a great play, obviously, but rather different.
If I could change tracks a little bit, because I like it, besides this is a fascinating discussion, but you also have expertise in multicultural communications, particularly how it affects leadership. And so could you talk a little bit about the importance of multicultural communications and leadership, and particularly in today's world where so much of that communication has to be done virtually?
Yeah, when I'm talking about culture, there are many models of culture. The one that I use divides cultures into three types, and we talk about linear active cultures, which are very structured, organized, data oriented. So Americans are quite like that, Germans, Nordics. Then multi-active cultures, so you'd be talking more Mexico, Latin America, Southern Europe, the Middle East, and they're more people oriented. And then we talk about reactive cultures, which are more like in the Far East, and they listen a lot. They're very interested in achieving consensus, etc. And they don't initiate much. Now, in the virtual world by nature is quite linear. It's quite transactional. And so linear people generally quite like being in the virtual world. Multi-actives can find it a bit of challenge, because for them, what's really important is building relationships. And, they're touchy-feely as well. So being remote from people makes it harder. And then reactives, one of the key challenges for them is the communication, because they're not good at interrupting or putting their point of view forward, even in real life. But when it's virtual, you need a good leader to bring them in and say, look, can we just stop for a moment, Antonio? We need to hear what Mr. Watanabe has to say. And one interesting thing I found about the reactives, one of my Japanese colleagues said to me recently that apparently Zoom in Japan have been getting a lot of inquiries from companies saying, is it possible to make it so that when we have the screen and everyone's faces there, that the leader is always at the top, and that the leader has a bigger picture, and then the next line of management has slightly smaller pictures, and then so they're sort of trying to bring the real world into the virtual world. So I think, as I said, it's transactional and linear, but as the lockdowns went on and working from home, even the linears, everyone started to miss the human interaction. And so people have started finding ways to make it more human, having a virtual coffee break, having quizzes, beginning with some small talk, etc. And have realized that this sort of thing is quite important. The final thing I'd like to say about the virtual world of leadership is that it's quite ironic that we're working at a distance. And in many cultures, leaders are at some distance. We call it power distance from others. Not in every culture, I mean, not in Sweden, for example, but in many cultures. And suddenly they're being brought into more intimate contact because, you can see their cat in the background, the kids fighting, and suddenly we're brought into their home. So it's becoming more human. And, how do you deal with that? Do you find that something which is actually leveling and making us feel more like a band of brothers, or do you find it awkward to be put into that more intimate contact? So it's this thing of intimacy plus distance. It's a fascinating irony in a way.
It has broken down some barriers. One of the leaders I was coaching about a year ago said the light bulb went off for him when he was having a staff meeting and his spouse was also on the internet, and two of his children were being educated from home, and the internet went down. And suddenly he realized what his employees are going through, because most of his employees, obviously are not in the same socioeconomic conditions and had the same family situations at home without the necessarily the broadband bandwidth that he had in his domain. And he said, boy, that light bulb just went on, and I just realized that we may be we're not on all the same boat. His boat was bigger than others, but we're on the same storm. And he started realizing, so there's been some silver linings coming out of the pandemic. Few and far between, unfortunately, but a few silver linings.
Well, I think it's made people reassess things, and it's an opportunity to reassess, what's important in our life, what is important about leadership, because we've had to rejig our perceptions. And I think a lot of the learning is about rejigging those perceptions and making things as a leader psychologically safe. It's a popular term these days for employees, so that they can challenge, so that they can talk about mistakes openly. And perhaps working remotely in a way has made that easier because it is a bit of a leveler.
Michael, if we could focus in on the next 5, 6, 7 minutes or so. Actually, we could do this all day, but I think people will want to go have a drink.
Me too.
Check out. But what would Shakespeare, what would English literature say about people who are cooped up, not imprisoned, locked down, but mentally it feels like that to a lot of people. And how do we get, how does leadership communicate that there's a way to avoid mental illness from all of this pressure?
Yeah, that's quite a difficult question. I immediately thought of a line from Macbeth. At one point, Macbeth says, he feels cabined, cribbed, and confined. And he's sort of in a mental prison there. And actually, it does drive his wife mad. I mean, she goes nuts, basically, because of this situation. So people can build themselves into these prisons. I mean, T.S. Eliot talks about this in The Wasteland, that, this feeling of being in a prison. How you break out of that is not easy. And I mean, it sort of, those prisons in this case, not in the sense that we've been forced into a prison through COVID, but these are prisons of our own making. I mean, the English romantic poet Blake called it the mind-forged manacles. So it's like manacles that we have created ourselves. And so I think self-understanding is absolutely crucial. If you can't lead yourself, how do you lead other people? And Plato talked about that in the Republic. So it's not a new concept, but it's and a lot of the best concepts are not new. And I think having clear sight is really important, and that is a metaphor that goes through a lot of writing, both in philosophy and leadership. So, in Plato's Republic, there's the metaphor of the cave, and what most people are seeing is the shadows of puppets dancing next to a fire. But then eventually, the most enlightened people have actually managed to get out of the cave. So again, he's talking about confinement and see the sun. But it's hard to bear that light, and a lot of leaders who do fail, I think, suffer from some sort of blindness. And this is very much a theme in King Lear, where blindness is one of the main metaphors, but it's also real blindness. So, one of Lear's daughters has Gloucester actually physically blinded. Horrible line when it happens. It's the line is "out vile jelly," and he has his eyes gouged out on stage. It's in Oedipus he blinds himself. So I think this clear-sightedness and it is absolutely key. And in Lear's case, it's his pride, it's his ego again, which was the worst of the 7 deadly sins in Christian thought, and he just can't see it. And it's brilliantly mirrored in Succession. If any of you have been watching that series, Succession, maybe not.
No.
How popular it is.
So talk about pop culture for a second as we come to a close in the next few minutes. The Spider-Man movie is a huge mega hit, and who would guess, but it's turned out to be an escape for so many people in so many places. They're going to the movies and watching this thing with other people, and it's making all this mega bucks, but it's like out of nowhere it's come. And it's like a pathway towards leaving your troubles behind. I don't know. I'm done talking.
Yeah. Well, I've not seen. I don't really know much about Spider-Man, unfortunately. But he is a hero of sorts. But I think people have sought a lot of escapism during the pandemic. I mean, I've done it myself. The amount of Netflix and HBO things I've watched is just staggering. And I think people do need that escape sometimes.
Well, the people are escaping a lousy boss, right? The Great Resignation, right, Stephen?
Absolutely.
A lot of them are, and I will highly recommend to you the American TV series House, which is about Dr. Gregory House, who's a highly flawed character, a very interesting leader, builds great loyalty in his team, but you wouldn't necessarily want to have him as your boss sometimes, the way he acts. But that whole series could have been written by Shakespeare, I think, or the Greeks, one of the two.
The Greeks, yeah.
Okay. This has been a fascinating discussion. Thank you. Thank you for setting it up,
Michael.
Yeah, well, thank you for the great questions as well. Because
I don't know where they came from. I've only had one cup of coffee. 7 a.m. here,
Oh yeah, it's early. Yeah.
All right, my friends. Thank you and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Please come back, Michael.
Will do.
Happy holidays.
We'll see you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Alessia.
Thank you for joining us in the meeting room at Global TV Talk Show.
Have a wonderful day, and stay safe.